Hello S3D, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'm going to add this to the playlist that will be in the description. I'll try to remember to put some more recent videos in the description because this is a carry-on. Will shows the geometry, the metrology, the mathematics in not just the Great Pyramid, how that links to all of the major pyramids of Egypt, how that links to also other ancient structures across the world in a measurable, tangible sense. And so whether it's Hermes or Mercury, guide of weights and measures, Thoth and Shesat, guide of weights and measures, architecture, chemistry, knowledge, maths, which is comparison also to be found with Nuar and Fuzi in ancient China, carrying the compass and the square, the geometry, the metrology, especially recent episodes has got to do with the 30-degree or the 1 second pendulum. So we see here the Templar cross, how that is a wonderful geometry as a beginning point in regards to that. And okay, so previous ones I went through various pendulums of sizes where we all have a very accurate second depending on your position on the earth and how these tie in together, including the supposedly modern meter and how that joins up with others. We'll come back to this. This would definitely not the first video to watch, definitely not, but anyway. So we begin with this pendulum of 3.3 feet. So we start here with, let's call that the Riccioli pendulum, or the Jesuit pendulum of 1 second at 45 degrees north. That would be 0.994387 meters. And if we keep adding this, anyway, again, that would be best covered in the other ones, but how this connects from whether it's ancient India, the Indus civilizations, Sumerians, Egyptians, the Karnak structures in France and stone circles in England also corresponds with, well, so much, including the modern world, especially that would be connected to the esoteric, or let's just say Masons. So 3.3 feet, that was the pendulum we see here, 3.3 feet. 1.00584 meters, 3.3 feet, 3 Indus units, or a Saxon yard, 3 Saxon feet. But okay, so there's a geometry which gives you the 1 second pendulum. So let's begin with 3.3 feet. If we divide that up, well, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, the Indus civilization, what you'll find is that 33 feet is one of the standards there in the construction. So for instance, in their brickworks, their bricks carry a certain mathematical proportion, height to length to width, etc. This is repeated throughout. Through the study of this, through some artifacts as well, that's how the Mohenjo-Daro foot, let's just call it the Mohenjo-Daro foot for the moment, connects. So Ernest Mackay, Whitelaw, even Petrie, others studying the weights and measures of the Indus civilization have found that one of the key measurements used in the architecture there was 13.2 inches or 1.1 feet. So 3.3 feet, that's 1/3 of that. I'll put links in the description because the connections, so 13.2 inches of Mohenjo-Daro foot was then divided down into 1.32 inches, implying a decimal ruler, but they were not dividing into 12s as most feet would be, or even the Egyptian scale, which divided into 7s and 4s between the cubit, but they were using a decimal ruler. This is an important feature. Again, this has been further exampled and studied. Again, links in the description. Now, let's call it the Belgic or the North German or the Saxon foot, which was a predecessor to the modern English foot. That was also 1.1 feet. Again, very well studied. I'll put some links in the description. Even the Wikipedia articles aren't too bad on it. Here we see on the English yard and pound. So, for instance, the Saxon foot, 13.2 inches for building and land measure. It's also some interesting connections in regards to, for instance, the Welsh foot. But there we see that the ancient Indian foot is the same as the Belgic or North German or the Saxon foot, which was introduced to England from the continent quite some time ago and was used pretty much up until the modern English foot was really introduced. Interesting note in regards to the Welsh foot, it's at a 3:4 ratio of the Saxon foot. That's 3 to the 4th, 3 to 4, the perfect fourth in music. This can be found in the vesica as well. So again, the geometry now. There's a very interesting unit called the Cremona foot. There are mentions of it, and it sort of disappeared. But the Cremona foot, so 6 Cremona feet equals 6 English feet. So a Welsh yard, so 3 Welsh feet, is 1.4142857 repeater, and that's very, very close. So a Cremona cubit is, sorry, 1 Welsh yard is 1.141. So I'll begin again. 1.4142857 repeater Cremona cubits. So close to the square root of 2, which is an interesting feature and is repeated throughout other systems. We'll touch on this as well. So for instance, on the composition of yards and perches, sometimes between 1266, 1303, the rod went from 5 old yards to 5.5 new yards, or 15 old feet to 16.5 new feet. That's a ratio of 10 to 11, or 1.1, between the modern English and the Saxon unit. The furlong went from 600 feet to 660 new feet. This is so important in regards to the meaning of New Jerusalem, the dimensions given of New Jerusalem, and how it connects to meters and so many other units as well. I can't go because I've covered that. It's all the harmonic numbers, all these lovely geometric numbers are just repeated, which coincidentally perfectly blends with the description of the Ark of Utnapishtim, or the preserver of life, as describing the great flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, this Sumerian Babylonian epic. But what we have is that the Mohenjo-Daro foot is the same as the Belgic, North German, or the Saxon foot. Here's another interesting one. The Sumerian foot of 20 Shusi, which is a prototype of a medieval foot that even Petrie reported. So the Sumerian or Babylonian, early Babylonian, let's call it, but the Sumerian foot is the same as the Saxon, the same as the Mohenjo-Daro scale. This has been passed on. Now I must remind you, all of these, not just the measures themselves, but the numbers contained therein are just exquisite in regards to describing Earth, Sun, Moon, geometric proportions, angles of the major polygons, the vesica Pisces. It's embedded in geometry and mathematical constants as well. Now while we're here, thus the royal cubit, so the Sumerian cubit of 19.8 inches, a Sumerian cubit is 1.1 feet. Thus the royal cubit, that's the Egyptian royal cubit, is 25 over 24, the length of a Sumerian cubit. So firstly, Sumerian cubit of 19.8 inches, that's converts to 1.65 feet. That's 1/10 of an English pole, otherwise known as a rod or a perch. Composition of yard and perches. The rod, the pole, the perch again would connect to the furlong, or the chain again connects exquisitely to New Jerusalem as described in the King James Version. And also 1/10 is an important feature as well. This will be repeated. So the royal cubit, Egyptian royal cubit, is 25 to 24 length of a Sumerian cubit. So 1.65 feet times 25 over 24 is 1.71875 feet. 1.7178 feet is an Egyptian royal cubit. That's a difference of 0.276 millimeters. I'll try to remember to put the links because this connects to the long foot. So one long foot is, so that's a typo. One long foot, not imperial foot, equals 1.056 feet. I'll put the links there in the description because this connects to stone circles and so many other places as well. But remember this 25 over to 24 ratio? Well, 1.1 feet equals 1.04166666 long feet, and 25 divided by 24 is 1.04166666. This is a connection between this 24 over 25 ratio. I bring that up because in the previous video I was talking about the Doric, Ionic, and the modern, or the common foot, as is embedded in the Salamis stone, which can be found in places such as the Parthenon, etc. The ratios between these 16 to 15, 25, 24 to 25, 9 to 10. And again, in the Salamis stone, this also relates to the Samian foot. So if we look at it at fingers, we have a lovely harmonic where they're all at the same unit of measurement. We usually think of feet as thumbs or inches, but especially historically, it was more often thought as, so instead of 1 foot being 12 inches, which it was, but it was very often more thought of as 1 foot equals 16 fingers. So the finger rather than the thumb would be the important measure to consider, because, for instance, the Royal Egyptian cubit was divided into palms and fingers, not into thumbs. Alright, so this 24 to 25 ratio. Presentation by Randall Carson, he talks about Stecchini. So what we find is the height of the Parthenon, if we're using not the roof, but this is traditionally the way to measure, we see fingers. Now, the width of the Parthenon is 100 Greek feet. And what exactly is a Greek feet? It can be confusing. That's a common Greek foot. But Livio Stecchini, he published on this and he spoke about the width of the Parthenon and how the width of 100 Greek feet, well, Mycenaean, Roman and Greek, 15 to 16, 9 to 10 and 24 to 25 ratio being found in there. The Wikipedia page, as is the case with Wikipedia, it's most scholars consider, this is speaking of Stecchini, most consider his unpublished work on metrology based on his ancient numismatics, which is study of coins, for instance, as numerology and pseudo-scientific metrology. Well, I don't know how you define pseudo-scientific metrology. It's based on measurement. It's interesting that they would say that. But anyway, what Stecchini pointed out was that, for instance, 15 to 16 and 24 to 25 were repeated ratios, as he pointed out here. Well, if we go back to his pseudo-scientific metrology, okay, so we go back to the Parthenon, for instance, his 24 to 25 ratio, which can be found not just in the height of a Parthenon via the Salamis stone, this is verifiable, but also the width of 100 feet, this 24 to 25 ratio. So we see multiple sets of ancient units of measure coming together at very specific proportions and basically delivering us very harmonic numbers as well. So back to the Sumerian foot, which is its 24 to 25, to the Egyptian royal cubit, to within a fraction of a millimeter, which is whenever it comes to measurement, there's always this margin of error in there. That margin of error, if it was applied to any other non-pseudo-scientific metrology, would be well within acceptable margins of error, yet for some reason, anyway. But just so happens again that the long foot, which has been suggested, Mike Parser Pearson, for instance, found that in stone circles such as Stonehenge and so many others, that connects, well, the long foot is one Mohenjo-Daro or Belgic or Sumerian foot is a ratio of 25 to 24 to the long foot. And okay, so 3.3 feet when it breaks down into imperial, well, it converts to the Saxon, which is the Belgic, or the North German, which is the Sumerian, which is Mohenjo-Daro. Very, very harmonic in there. And just so back, I mentioned the Cremona scale. Well, 3.7714, etc. Just so happens the Great Pyramid, 22/7, gives you a very good approximate of pi times phi over 6, gives you 3.7142857 repeater. So as we saw earlier, now this proportion of the pyramid is the same one which can be found in the capstone found next to the Red Pyramid, which is just happens to be exactly 1 meter high, or it was before it was renovated, but for some mysterious reason. Or the Pyramid of Meidum in Egypt shares the same 7 to 11 ratio. So it's not just the actual measure, it's also the ratios that are so important in there. Okay, we're getting up to 15 minutes, but King Edgar the Peaceful, he kept a prototype yardstick at Winchester. The idea of his standardized measure, so his yardstick, 3.3 imperial feet, as we saw. Okay, I'm going to have to put this into the next, actually I'll put them together and just keep going. King Edward I, Longshanks as well, the imperial yard. King Edward I. Longshanks is the king from Braveheart, but we see one of his statutes from 1305. This is important because it shows the divisions of various measurements. So, for instance, it is ordained that 3 grains of barley corn, dry and round, make an inch. 12 inches make a foot. 3 feet make an ulna, a yard. 5.5 ulna or yard make a rod. And 40 rods in length and 40 in breadth make an acre. This, again, Gunther's chain, furlong. Very important land measures, because those land measures were based on how much men and oxen could plough in a day or plough without rest. This is a very important feature. Man is a measure of all things. It was not just based on the physical dimensions of the idealized man. It was also built on his work capacity. So still, like horsepower is work capacity, we still use this as a system of measurement. It is to be remembered that the iron ulna, the yardstick from which all measures were based, this was, again, we find references to King Edgar the Peaceful, the Anglo-Saxon king. This is not the actual, this is an example of a prototype bar that the US had, but the surviving, there isn't the prototype yard of Edgar doesn't survive, but we find through measures of his architecture and land, for instance, we know that that was the Saxon yard, or the Belgic, or the North German. So 1.1 feet is a Saxon foot, or North German, or the Belgic, which goes back to Roman era, by the way. But the division, so that's why I'm bringing this up, because we see how the divisions of yards, feet, inches, fingers and grains work. And so this is important. So the 3.3 feet, so for instance, Rushton Triangular Lodge by Sir Thomas Tresham, very enigmatic building. Tresham was an occultist, as it was called, but 33 feet long on each side, or 30 Saxon yards. This is an important measure, for instance, in Masonic tradition. For instance, the House of a Temple in Washington, headquarters of US Scottish Rite Freemasonry, 33 columns, 33 feet high each. You can find this as a standard measure throughout other Freemasonic, for instance, Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis, 33 feet all over the place, very important. I did a whole playlist regarding 33 feet and these connections in there. But for instance, the US Capitol, these columns are now in the National Arboretum in Washington, were originally from the US Capitol building. They're 33 feet high. There are 33 steps and etc. It's all over the place. But St. Peter and Paul's, the old Catholic Cathedral here in Goulburn, Australia, for instance, 33 feet wide, 33 feet wide on the transepts. This is just really is a standard. Durham Cathedral, the tower itself, Central Tower, 33 feet. Very important, influential number. But back to, for instance, that this was in use in ancient civilizations such as the Indus, Mohenjo-daro. But you'll also find so the Wall of the Crow in Giza. When it comes to measuring height of a wall, now we have a big problem because we don't know. Well, firstly, things like this don't tend to be measured with a high precision because it's not considered important generally. But it's anywhere between 32 to 33 feet high on all available sources. Now, if it was, for instance, plastered and there was a 1 inch of plaster on the top, this would change the measurement. But in Giza itself, so Khafre's pyramid was built on a plateau 33 feet higher than the Great Pyramid on available measures as well. But there was also a 33 feet wide terrace around it. So height is always a problem because height can, especially of walls, can be lost over time. So for instance, Saqqara, the stepped pyramid, there was an enclosure wall 33 feet high. The exact height, very hard to tell. So all of the heights of these walls, I have to put an asterisk here, but we will find, for instance, the terrace at the Khafre's pyramid, but also, for instance, at Abu Simbel, the statues are 66 feet and 33 feet. We're at 66 or 33. But this is some examples that it's not just ancient Indus, but we'll find it across the world. Now, for instance, Blue Stonehenge. I think it's almost exactly a mile from Stonehenge down by the river there. The 33 feet wide diameter of the bluestone circle inside the henge. In Carnac in France, the Manio quadrilateral, which is at a ratio of 3 to 11, which gives you squaring the circle, etc., but 33 feet wide. And the length at 121 feet, well, that converts to 11 over 7 Cremona chain. I mentioned the Cremona unit before, and also because of a 1.1 foot, so nicely connects as well. But 11 over 7, well, the pyramid is 11 wide, 7 high. Pardon. So back to the Hindu decimal ruler, and used in Harappa, that was divided into units of 10. Now 10 is an important number because, for instance, in ancient Egypt, the rod, or the rod of cord, or the stick of rope, was 100 cubits. So we all know the major pyramids, but there are also these other unfinished or dismantled pyramids. So often they're 100 cubits length in base. This is an important measure. But it's also how the various units of measurement in ancient Egypt were also built basically around tens or hundreds as well. And tens, 10 fingers, this is one of the reasons. It's also just in math, it's a beautiful, that's why we use base 10 now, and the metric system, because the way that tens operate is just very simple, very easy, but it also has a natural element in there. But early on in this series, I've mentioned the Vitruvian Man. So that's the image by Leonardo da Vinci, but it's based on much older text, 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius. So in book 3, chapter 1, he talks about the symmetry in temples and the human body, and that the divisions of the body and the proportions inherent in the human body are so important in the design of a temple. A proportion is a correspondence among the measures of the members of an entire work and of the whole to a certain part selected as standard. From this result the principles of symmetry. Without symmetry in proportion there can be no principles in the design of any temple, that is, if there is no precise relationship between its members, as in the case of those of a well-shaped man. And again, you can pause to read. It's a free download. You can get 10 books of architecture. Now in chapter 4. So therefore, since nature has designed the human body that its members are duly proportioned to the frame as a whole, it appears that the ancients had good reason for their rule. Now this was written by Vitruvius in the 1st century BC. When he speaks of ancients, he's not talking about ancient. For him, Rome was contemporary. He's speaking about the ancients. Now the Romans and the Greeks themselves, in their texts, describe how they learnt their maths, their astronomy from the Chaldeans, Babylonians / Sumerians, and the Egyptians, and particularly the Egyptians at Heliopolis. So the ancients had good reason for their rule. When Greek and Roman writers talk about the ancients, they're not talking about themselves, they're speaking about those who come before, the Indians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians. And also in that same book 3 as well, it is worthy of remark that the measures necessarily used in all buildings and other works are derived from the members of the human body as the digit or the finger, the palm, the foot, the cubit, and these form a perfect number called by the Greek, can't pronounce that. The ancients considered 10 a perfect number because their fingers are 10 in number and the palm is derived from them, and from the palm is derived the foot. So 4 fingers, the width of your fingers is the width of your palm, palms, feet, inches, the basis for devising up units. Plato therefore called 10 a perfect number, for nature having formed the hands with 10 fingers. Also we'll speak about, for instance, the mathematicians on the other hand contend for the perfection of the number 6 because according to their reasoning its divisors equal its number, 6 is part of 1, etc, etc. Now why is 6 a perfect number? Well, it connects to tens as well, and this goes back to, well, Enoch, or Metatron's cube, and the legend of Enoch preserving the knowledge prior to the flood, and the Tetragrammaton, which is so important in Kabbalist and Judaism still now. Now, for instance, Hermes Trismegistus and Pythagoras are, by legend, two of the people who uncovered the knowledge of Enoch, the cube and the two pillars of knowledge preserving prior to the flood. But we have connected to Enoch the tetragrammaton, or the name of God. We also have the Pythagorean Tetractys, which is essentially the same thing. So in regards to 33, I did videos on these as well, the numerical, these lovely numbers built in there, but back to the reason that the ancients had good reason for their rule, and the ancients considered 10 a perfect number. So there you see the Tetractys or tetragrammaton. That's essentially, it's a depiction of the triangular numbers. So we have 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. We also have 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. So now 6 is a perfect number because you can divide 6 into 3, into 2, and into 1. If you add the divisors of 6, you get 6. That's why it's a perfect number. But it's the most perfect of perfect numbers because 1 times 2 times 3 also equals 6. This only happens with 6. But getting a little... Okay, but also in regards to the Tetractys or the tetragrammaton and music theory, we look at Pythagorean hammers and Pythagorean music theory. Again, these are all based on the Vesica or the Tetractys, but also units of measure. So 1 fathom equals 2 yards, 2 cubits equals 3 feet, 3 feet equals 4 span. That's the imperial divisions. Also how we saw King Edward I, at least we have that surviving text to show how they got their divisions down. But this all connects because in regards back to weights and measures, Thoth, Sheshet, Hermes Trismegistus, the legends of Enoch and the cube. But in regards to this as well, I'll put the link will be in the description. Is a site Atlantis, Bolivia, or Bolivia, Atlantis. But he points about in Oaxaca, Mexico, Monte Alban. This is said to be the oldest pre-Columbian site in Latin America. It's considered the place from where so much information was spread out. Now he's pointed out that throughout the entire complex, you'll find, for instance, 330 feet, or 3.3 times 100. As we saw, 33 feet is 3.3 times 10. Okay, so, but also 165 foot. So half of 3.3 is 1.65, or 1/10 of a rod or a pole or a perch, and 165 feet is 10 times a rod or a pole or a perch. And this will be for the next video, but this is really just an intro. I know it's going all over the place if you're not familiar with weights and measures and numbers, but this connects to the second, the pendulum, ancient societies across the world in a measurable way based on the architecture, on the artifacts. But so we saw 3.3 feet, but that is based on the radius of the circle. Now we have the diameter of a circle at 6.6 feet. That just so happens to convert to, so that's 105.6 digits or fingers in the ancient Greek scales of Doric and Ionic, as in the Doric and Ionic column on Freemasonic tracing boards. That converts to 99 and 110. We have a lovely conversion point. But on the Salamis stone, it also includes a Samian scale, and from point to point would be 1.000901776 Samian cubits. That's 27.3 digits or fingers on the imperial scale, or feet or meters as we see there. That's a difference of 0.469 millimeters there. So there's the Salamis stone, which has all the Doric, the Ionic, the allegedly modern English foot, and the Samian scale in there. Mark Wilson Jones, of credit to him, he's posted those papers in earlier things, but how these, when we consider fingers rather than inches, how we get the common or English fingers, Doric, Ionic, and Samian being a descriptor there. We saw the 24 to 25 ratios, for instance. That just happens to be 100 long fingers as well, and so much more in regards to that, because that same 3.3 foot pendulum, the one we see here, well, cross, it's a Samian cubit, they're so close, and the arc, that section of arc, is at 27.3 grams all the world. That's one canonical cubit within a fraction of a hair in there. So this is really just an intro in regards to how the pendulum and these various units of measure count together.